Today's daf is daf Pei Hey, and we'll begin with Ika Diamri, which is line 5. Ika Diamri, Kicha Itzrichle. We need the lav of Lo Yikachu, which prohibits a chalola from marrying a Kohen. And the reason why we need Lo Yikachu is not because it's impossible to derive it from the drasha and the principle of Rabbi Yehuda Marav, Isha, tells you that Hishva Kosuv Ish li Isha li Ish li Kol Otchib Shabbat Torah. And that principle itself would, just 1 second, would apply to again, let me start again. I'm sorry, I got the negative and the positive mixed up. The principle of Ish O Isha of Rabbi Yehuda Barav would apply logically to the case of a chalola being enjoined for marrying a Kohen. And even though the Iser of chalola in Kahuna is what we call a lav chain chav bakol, nevertheless, we would apply and extend the scope of the principle of Ish O Isha and the equation between an Ish and an Isha, even to a lav she'eno chav bakol. The only reason I need lo yikachu, then, says the Gemara, in the case of a chalola, in the case of Tuma, the Torah said B'nai Aaron, and we had a mute of B'nai Aaron for lo B'nos Aaron. So a Kohenes is allowed to enter into a cemetery. And if we would apply that heter, that leniency, to all the laws of Kohanim, and draw the mistaken conclusion that the lavim of Kahuna only apply to him, to the Kohanim, but not to the Kohanos, then Kamashmal, and then I need the pasuk lo yikachu to teach me that a chalol is not is enjoined from marrying a Kohen. Papa Rav Huna Breder Rabbi Yeshua Iklu Lechinsavu. They came to a town called Intzavu, Li Asrei de Rav Idi Baravin, and that was the local city of Rav Idi Baravin. Bo Mine. And Rav Papa and Rav Huna Breder Rav Yeshua asked the following question. Apparently, they asked it to the local Talmidei Chachamim. Huzaru Sheros, we're talking about Kohanos, Li Nasi Lipsulim Olo. Is it a two-way street? That just like a Kohen kosher is not allowed to marry a Chalola, so too a Kohenis Kshera is not allowed to marry a Chalol. Amalu Rav Papa D'Nisua. We're going to derive this from the Mishnah itself. And this is a Mishnah Masechet Kiddushin on Daf Samach Tes. Asar Yuchsin Olu Mi Bavel. So at the time of Ezra and the Aliyah Shniya, when they came up from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, they were divided into many different categories of Yuchsin. And Ezra brought with him from Bavel all these categories, including Psulim. In fact, he left behind him in Bavel, Kohanim Levim Yisrael Ksherim. And the reason for that is that at this point in time, Ezra wanted to establish and guarantee that his Beis Din in Eretz Yisrael would be able to oversee the marriage and make sure that Psulim would not marry Ksherim. So he left out the Ksherim, took the Psulim. Kohanim, Leviim, Yisraelim, Chalolim, right? So Chalol, as we said many times, is the product of an Iser Kahuna. Gerim, we know what Gerim are. The Charurim is also a type of a ger. When you have an Eved Knani and you Meshacher the Eved, he becomes a ger. And Mamzerim, right? So Mamzerim is already Psule Kol. That's not just Psule Kahuna. Then we have Nesinim, and those are the Givonim who already at the time of Yoshua subjected them to Milah. David later on instituted a Gzera and gave them the status of Chotvei Eitzim, Shovei Mayim. They were Avodim, they couldn't marry into the Jewish people. Then we have a Shtuki, Vasuvi. These are types of children that are found abandoned in such a way that they have the status of a Suffolk Mamzerim. And the rule is the following. Kohanim, Levim, Yisraelim, Mutarim, Lavo, Zebazeh. So that a Kohen can marry a Bas Levi and a Bas Yisrael and so forth and so on. But now the Kohanim, when we get to Psulim, are pushed aside. They're dropped out. Only Leviim Yisraelim could marry Chalolim, Gerim, and Charurim. Mutarim Lavo Zebazeh. Because now the Kohanim are Asurim. They're not allowed to marry Gerim. They're not allowed to marry Chalolim. But everyone else, Yisraelim, Leviim Yisraelim, could marry Gerim and Chalolim, no problem. Okay, but now we get to what's called Psulei Kol, and that's Geri Charure Mamzeri Nisini Shtuki Vasufi. Mutarim Lavo Zebazeh. They can intermarry because they're all Psulei Kol. Or, I shouldn't say they're all Psulei Kol, because on this list you also find Gerim and Charurim. They are what's called Kahal Gerim Lo Ikri Kol. They're not Psulei Kol, but they're not part of the Kol, so therefore they can marry Psulei Kol. So the Gemara now is Medayik. Ve'ilu kohanos lechola lo ktani. When it says Chalolim in this Mishnah in Kiddushin, it limits it to Leviim and Yisrael. The Kohanim are not allowed to marry Chalolim. But wait a minute. Amongst the Kohanim, we also have Kohanos. So why didn't the Mishnah point out that a Kohenes Kshera is allowed to marry a Chalal? And that would be the exception to the rule that excludes a Chalal from Kohanim.
Hello. Well,
So the Gemara wants to derive a conclusion here that a Kohenes Kshera is enjoined from marrying a Chalal. And now the Gemara is going to reject that proof. Amalei, Rav Huna, Breder, Rav Yeshua, Rav Papa. It's very possible that a Kohenes Kshera just one second. Let me just read the next line. because the Masechet is throwing me off base here. 1 second. Kol hecha dahani nasve mihani v'hani nasve mihani ktoni. Kohen came into ilu boy mintav chalola asirle is lo ktoni. So again, Nachmal, the Gemara wanted to derive the conclusion that what? 1 second. It says here that Levium Yisraelim Chalol doesn't mention Kohanos. Ilu Kohanos Chalol Lo Ktani. What does it mean Lo Ktani? Lo Ktani, that they're allowed to, right? So we're deriving the conclusion that they're not allowed to marry a Chalol. A Kohanes Ksher is not allowed. So what's Amalei Rafuna? The Olam Yitachen Shekohenes Kshera Asuros Li Nase Lekonim Psulim. I think there's a mistake here in the Masechet. Let me just see. It's very rare that they make any mistakes, so it's usually me. Vatam Shel Shanu Din Zebe Mishnah. So at you medayik that it didn't mention. I thought the heter in the Mishnah. And the reason it didn't mention is called Hechet Dahani Nasbi Mani Ani Osmi Hani. So the Mishnah is telling you that when the heter is both b'zcharim, both b'nekevos, then it mentions, but Kohen came into Ilu, Boy Lemisvei, Mitzvah Chalola, Asirale. So Kohen's not allowed to marry a Chalola. Enes, yeah, there's a mistake here. As far as this is really mind-boggling to me, Rabbi Rhodes. There's a mistake here that's really throwing me off here. It seems to me that the Gemara, and that was Rav Papa, was being medayik from the Mishnah in Kedushin that a Kohenes is not allowed to marry a Chol, a Kohenes Ksher, obviously. And now Rav Huda Breder Rav Yeshua is responding to Rav Papa, and he's saying, no. In truth, a Kohenes, even though she's a Kshera, is allowed to marry a Chol. If so, why didn't it mention it? Because the Mishnah is only mentioning when it's a two-way street. When both Zecharim and Nekevos are mutarim lavo zeh b'zeh, and when Zecharim and Nekevos asurim zeh b'zeh. And therefore, the case of Cholol, as far as Kohenes is concerned, was left out because it doesn't work in both directions. So the final conclusion here of Rav Huna is that a Kohenes Kshera is allowed to marry a Cholol. He writes here, I'm going to read to you the Masechet. I have to write a letter to the Masechet. He writes, Amalei Rav Huna, Breder Rav Yeshua, Rav Papa, Liol mitochen ta Kohenes Kshera asuros li nase lekohen. This word asuros is wrong. It should say mutaros.
Yeah, the art scroll has exactly the way you're saying it.
This is very illegal. You're saying a cheer and you're looking in front of you, and all of a sudden, the whole thing just doesn't make any sense. All right, I'm going to write it in here on my Gemara. Maybe somehow I can pass it on. Also, right? This all took place in Hinatzu, and the Rav Harashi of Hinatzu is none other than Rav Idi. They came, Rav Papa and Rav Huna, in front of Rav Idi. They asked them the question: is a Kohenes Kshera allowed to marry a Cholol? Amalahu, Dardaki, your children. Achi Om Rav Yehuda Rav. You don't know the statement of Rav Yehuda Rav. Everybody knows Rav Yehuda Rav's statement. Lo Huzru Ksheros Linase Lepsulin. there is no violation in terms of a Kohenes marrying a Chalol. And basically, the final conclusion is accepting Rav Huna against Rav Papa. Okay. Now, the Mishnah says, Shnios midivrei sofrim. If a man marries a woman who is prohibited midrabanan, then she loses her ksuba. Boy minei b'nei Beiri, the people in Beiri asked the following question: Rav Sheshes, Shnia lebal, v'lo shnia leyavam, yesh la ksuba miyavam o lo. Hey, let me just shut this off. Sorry. Okay. Now, a man is married to a shnia, and that's an Isud Rabbanon, and then he dies without children. So his wife falls for Yibum. The Yavam is not related at all to the Yevamot, except for the fact that she was his late brother's wife. But he doesn't have any kurva and a Isur of Shnios. And now the question is the following. She has no rights to the ksuba of her late husband, because in the case of Shnios, we're going to institute a penalty and she's going to have to forfeit the ksuba. However, what about the Yavam? Right, we have a mitzvah Yibum. We want to encourage and establish this marriage relationship of Yibum. So maybe now we should institute a ksuba and require the Yavam to write a ksuba. And the Gemara explains the two study. Kevan the Omer Mar, ksuba sal nichse baila rishon. We have a general principle back on Daf Lamed Ches that when a woman is taken by the Yavam to marriage, then the ksuba is collectible from the estate of the deceased, not from the Yavam, right? Because the Yavam didn't decide on his own initiative to marry her. The Torah imposed that on him. So he doesn't have to write a ksuba. And therefore, lesla. Let's apply that principle here in this scenario as well. And she has no rights to the ksuba. She has no rights to the ksuba of her late husband because it was a marriage of shnios. She has no rights to collect a ksuba from the Yavam because in general, Yavam doesn't write a ksuba. O Dilma, maybe in this case, we should institute as an exception to the rule a ksuba to the Yavam. Kevan de ilu lesle merichon, since she has no recourse to a ksuba from her late husband, is therefore takinu le rabbana misheni. And Isla, we should institute a ksuba, right, to protect her rights in the marriage of the Yavam. She cannot implement any of those rights vis-a-vis her first husband because of the illegality of that marriage. So let's now start from scratch with a new marriage to the Yavam and protect her interests by guaranteeing that she gets the ksuba from the Yavam. Amalu Rav Sheshes told the Bnei Bire, Tanisua, we learned it in a brisa. Ksubasal nichse baila rishon. In a normal case of a yibum, where the marriage is legitimate, she'll collect her ksuba when the Yavam divorces her or dies from the estate of her late husband, the first husband, but if the relationship between her late husband and herself was that of a shnios larayos, is afilu miyavam ein la. It's explicit here in the brisa that she doesn't get a ksuba at all. So the Gemara now is medayik. It says afilu miyavam ein la. Well, what's the afilu over here? Bichlal de ika de isle miyavam. Is there some other case where she would collect a ksuba from the Yavam? we know that that's not so. She never collects the ksuba from the Yavam. So what's the afilu here? Like in this case, even from the Yavam, she can't collect the ksuba, even though normally she would collect the ksuba from the Yavam. So my answer is chisure metzorach tani. Ksubasal nixay by la rishon the lesla marishon. In a case where she doesn't have any recourse to collect ksuba from the rishon, maybe he doesn't have any nechasim, he didn't leave her anything in the estate, or alternatively, it was a case of shnios larayos, is takinule misheni. The Rabbanan made a takana that she can collect her ksuba from the Yavam. Im hoisa shniel abal, afilim Yavam einla. Oh, I'm sorry. So I made one mistake here. The lesla means that there was no estate left, because in a case where she could not collect from her late husband because of shnios, then she cannot collect from the yavam. So in what scenario did Chachamim make a takana that a yavama could collect from the yavam? In a situation where she has no recourse to collect from her late husband because he left no estate. But in the case where she has no recourse to collect from her late husband because the marriage was illegitimate, in a case of shnios arayos, then she cannot collect even from the yavam. And I think the reason for this is that Suba was established by the Chacham Kadesh Lo Tehei Kala Be'enov Lotzia, but in this case of shnios arayos, but that's only vis-a-vis the former husband, the late husband. Why didn't they make a takana yavama? I suspect that the reason for this is that this is the extension of the knas, that they impose the penalty on her and she forfeits her rights to ksuba. You might think that in the framework of the marriage to the yavam, which is a mitzvah doraisa, we should make that takana of ksuba, and we should waive the knas. Kamash malan, no, that we're not going to waive the knas. She has no ksuba rights, neither to her first husband, the violation of shnios, nor to the yavam. Boy, minei Rabbi Lazar, may Rabbi Yochanan almana look going go to guchel chutz look going hedjot. Yesh la mizonos, oh, ein la mizonos. Now, there's a little bit of a chiddush here, to me at least, in this Gemara. I would have thought that it's a davar pashut that he has to support her, because mizonos is mitnaya ksuba. And just because he was a scoundrel, so to speak, and he violated the Isa Doraisa in this case, we're not going to let him off the hook on any of the Chiyuvei Ksuba. But the Gemara is going to say an exact opposite svara. And that is that we are demanding of him to divorce his wife. We're not going to allow this marriage to continue. It's a violation of a Doraisa. We can't turn around and force him to pay mizonos when at the same time we're telling him immediately divorce him. It just doesn't make sense. So that's what the Gemara asks. Hey, Chidami, Ilem Diosfa, to say if she's sitting in his house and she fills up her fridge and goes to the supermarket signing, swiping his credit card, her husband's credit card. Amod bahotzi kai, mizonos isla, that doesn't make sense. She has a right to demand support when the halacha is forcing him to divorce her. Again, you might ask, well, if that be the case, why does she why does she have any of the rights of the ksuba? There are many different rights that are written in the ksuba, including Mana Messiah. But the answer is we're going to penalize him. He's not a good guy. He's a scoundrel. Why did he marry this girl? He had no right to do so. So you better pay the ksuba. But to go ahead and say you should pay mizonos, that's already going too far, because mizonos means let's keep the marriage going and I'll support you perpetually during the course of the marriage. Lo tzricha, why do we have a havamina that he still has to support her, even though we're telling him to divorce his wife? Sheholachula medina sayam, because he checked out. We have no way of getting access to him. So she's never in this situation where she's got no husband around to support her. He is the scoundrel that A, married her illegally, and B, flew the coop. He went to the 7 seas. So Love Sa'achla, she was desperate. She went ahead and bought on credit. Rabbi Rhodes, how long are you in Eretz Yisrael? 10 years. So you won't. I don't think you're here long enough to relate to what I'm about to say. In the old days, you won't believe this, but this is what it was like in Israel. You went to your local makolet, and you didn't have to pay anything. He had like a card index, and he would just write down on the card what you owe him, and then after a month or so, you'd come around and pay your bills. Today, I don't think there's even a makolet on the face of the state of Israel where that will cut the mustard, But anyway, what do we say to her? She's going to have to pay back the makolet guy for all the food that she bought when he's out there, who knows where in Acapulco. And you can't tell me, well, we're forcing him to divorce his wife. He's not even available to be forced. So what then is the suffix? Is mizone tnai ksubaninu. You know what? When he married her and he wrote the ksuba, he, so to speak, signed on the ksuba, the two eidim or something. But anyway, he has committed himself to support her. So, with the isla ksuba, isla mizone. She has rights to mizonos. The only counterforce to her claim to mizonos is that he has to divorce her. But right now, he's not available for that. So in the meantime, in the interim, she can't starve to death, and let him pay up her chovos. O dilma, should we say ksuba dilim mishkal umefek isla? Mizone dilma ti akev gabe lesla. Ksuba means what we call the ikra ksuba. Mana in the case of a second marriage, Masayim in the case of a first marriage. And she collects that money when he divorces her. At the time of the Gerushin, she collects that Ikra Ksuba. However, when it comes to Mizone, again, even though he, as we said before, is very guilty here, he shouldn't have married her, and he's not around to divorce her, we still might be afraid of imposing a chiyuv mizonos on him because of a svara called Dilma ti akev gabe. Maybe she's going to delay and dilly-dally in order to, this is a very comfortable situation for her. Although the marriage is illegal, but he's out there wherever he is, and she's not stuck, like an almana, grusha out there in the world without any source of income. She's using his credit card. It's great. And you know what? It could be that even when he comes back, she is nowhere to be found. She's going to somehow sneak away. He'll never be able to give her a get. And we want to encourage the gerushin. So instead of giving her this incentive to stay in the marriage and be able to collect mizonos, we got to tell her, look, my dear, you are not going to collect mizonos. And that was the final conclusion of Yochanan, that she does not collect mizonos. So Gemara asks about Tanya Yeshla. Yeah, this is very smart, Rabbi Yochanan. Yeah, she doesn't get ksuba. She doesn't get mizonos. But we have a brisa that says explicitly she does get it. Kitanya hiliacha misa. Now this is really interesting. As long as he's alive, no matter where he is on the face of the earth, she doesn't have mizonos. But once he dies, she can collect mizonos, because that's one of the Tanaya Ksuba, that he obligated himself to support her in such a way that even after he dies, she'll collect the mizonos from his estate. And that his chayvus is still binding. While they're married, we don't want to get into the situation where, he's eager to give her a divorce and fulfill his responsibility. She's dilly-dallying. We don't want all that. But once he's dead already, then we go back to the original ischayvus, the shibud for mizonos, and she collects mizonos. That's called Tnai Ksuba. Isti Amri. Others bring the words of Rabbi Loza, Rabbi Yochanan in a slightly different fashion. Amalei, Rabbi Yochanan said to Rabbi Loza, Tanya Yeshla. Right? We just had before Lesla, but here it's Yeshla. So now that we ask from the kasha Amod Vahotzi, the logic is compelling that if we're forcing him to divorce her, how should he and why should he be paying mizonos? And the answer is Hadatanya Yeshla Ki Tanya Hi Liachar Misa. The only time that she can collect mizonos is after he dies, but during his lifetime, then we're going to say Amod Vahotze Koi, and therefore there's no reason to impose upon him a fee of mizonos. So the Istiami really comes to the same conclusion as the first Lishna, just in a different style. We're talking about a violation of an Isa Doraisa in the marriage Yeshla Ksuba. And that means that we're going to impose a penalty on the Baal. He had no right to marry her, and he violates an Isa Doraisa. And therefore, all the dimensions of ksuba are still valid and imposed chiyuvim on it. For example, ksuba meaning ikar ksuba mana masayim, peros, which means that if he eats the fruits of her trees or whatever's growing, that's called niksei malug, he has to pay for that. And mizonos, he's got to support her. And blows, if she brought in godim, and now, they've been used, and she wants to get it back. She has rights to do so. He psula, she can no longer marry a Kohen. She's a chalola through the beer that she had with this Iser Kuhuna. Uvlada pasul, and any child she has from this marriage is a pasul. He's a chalol. The kofino solahotzi, and we will force him to divorce her, because every moment he is violating a law. So that's all in a case of a violation of a biblical law. Shnios, midivrei sofrim. But what if the marriage is prohibited, midivrei sofrim? A man marries his grandmother, I don't know. Is ein law, she doesn't get ksuba, lo peros, lo mizonos, lo blos. Now we shift the knas from him to her, because the Shnil Sarayos. Make any sense? Well, the Gemara is going to make sense out of it. But the name of the game is patience. Hikshera, Vlada Kasher, Vakovno Solahot. A child is Kasher Lakuhuna. She herself is Ksher Lakuhuna. And this despite the fact that the marriage is illegitimate. Why do we impose a knas on him in the case of a violation of a biblical law? Because when the Kohen marries her, he's not allowed to do the avoda until he separates from her. She's psula because she becomes a chalola through his bia. V'chol makom sha'al shuhu pasul psula sha'al yidei anisuin, through this marriage. He becomes excluded from the avoda. She becomes a halol. She can no longer marry a kohen. She's also ksuva.